Oh, perfectly timed. I'm going to give Ms. Spiegel time to run to the front as I call to order the Assembly Finance Committee meeting of August 3rd. And oops, the flag salute got on this agenda. We're not an assembly meeting, so we'll just skip. That's okay. We'll just skip through that. And when Ms. Spiegel is ready, she can call the roll or note our roll or some combination thereof.
Thank you, Chair Treem. We have all assembly members present in chambers besides Assembly Member Gladaszewski, who is absent, and Assembly Member Wachlaw Gadak, who is also absent.
Thank you. Any objections or corrections to the minutes from the July 6th meeting? Seeing none, those are approved. We are going to make a slight agenda change. We are going to pull item C, that's repeal of nonprofit sales tax exemption. The ordinance wasn't quite ready for us to review, so we'll do that, I think, probably next month. But we will get started on agenda topic A, expansion of tax abatement for new housing. We discussed this last month, and I think staff has a couple of clarifying questions for us to decide quickly tonight, and then we'll talk about it again. So Mr. Watt, is this you?
Thank you, Chair. This is me for starters, and I just want to note that Mr. Barr, I think, is online with us tonight. So after the July 7th Finance Committee, where the committee passed a motion asking us to draft an ordinance to extend tax abatement area-wide. Mr. Palmer started drafting it, and we all looked at it, and then we kind of scratched our heads, and we thought, there's some different policy questions here that didn't immediately jump out at us. And the way I think we've gone at tax abatement, we've sort of incrementally, first we did senior housing, then we did downtown. And in this next step, I think the recommendation is that we take one philosophical step, and we may take other steps later. But the issue that we started to look at is the question of, are we trying to incentivize lots of lots with lots of, let's say, single family housing, or are we trying to incentivize multifamily housing on one lot? Are we trying to incentivize housing products that one owner or lots of owners? And the issue that we started to focus on, I think with multifamily, relatively straightforward. Developer comes in, develops a project under the assumption of this tax benefit, manages that project, and let's say an apartment building, and it helps their long-term finances to get that apartment building going. If it is a conventional subdivision, I think there's a little bit of a puzzle in how the market would respond. So if a developer came in and built a subdivision and there was a tax benefit, when the developer went to sell all those houses, they would probably be worth more if the tax benefit went with the houses. So if you think about it, do you want to buy a $400,000 house and you're going to pay property tax, or do you want to buy the same house and you're not going to pay property tax? So probably there would be a different market response. And I don't know that any of us really had gamed that out to how that would work in the long run and whether that was really what we were trying to do. So the memo tonight seeks to clarify two things for what I think is the next step, not to say that we won't take other steps. Units and lots and common ownership versus individual ownership. And so we came to the belief that we were talking about development on a single lot with a single ownership. And the idea here is trying to incentivize multifamily housing. So that's the recommendation for tonight. We can discuss that more, and obviously there can be more branches of this discussion, but I think that's the next logical step in our incentivization of housing units.
Thank you, Mr. Watt. Does anybody have questions on that? Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for these questions, and they're good ones. And I think I will probably I'd like to bring some of these questions also to the builders group at Chamber that I've been working with, because I think they might have some insights into that as well. When we say in the paragraph that says staff recommends that the assembly require that multiple units be built on a single lot. And I don't know all the correct this terminology, but in a neighborhood where there's typically single family houses and that's what it's zoned for, are duplexes allowed? Are fourplexes? I mean, when we're talking about encouraging multiple units to be built on a single lot, how well does that fit in our current zoning?
So through the chair, I think what this does is it would incentivize development in the denser zoning districts. So in a D1 zoning district, I think a developer would look at, if you accepted these recommendations and if we pass the ordinance, I think a developer would shrug and say, there's nothing for me in that. But in a D10 or a D18 or a mixed use zoning district that have very dense allowances for units, it would work. So if you were doing a 12-plex, say, or whatever. But I think that the less dense zoning districts there wouldn't be an incentive to develop them.
Thank you. We're going to talk about this more. Or? I have other questions, but I don't want to.
Would you have a question? Go ahead, Mr. Bryson.
My question was, could we limit this to different parts of town? I mean, I thought initially we were looking at trying to incentivize downtown building. My question was along the line of Ms. Hales. Can we use zoning and say, this is intended for D18 and above, so that way it eliminates single family homes, because they're making money on single family homes and they're still building those right now. I don't necessarily think that we might need to incentivize the thing that they're currently still doing. The multifamily lower cost housing that we're desperate for is what's not being developed. So is it real simple as to say, okay, it's D18 and above, and now we can do it all over town? Or does that, how do we limit it or give it sideboards so that we're truly incentivizing the level of project that we want, multifamily and above?
I think Mr. Palmer, who has got Mr. Barr's name tag, is going to answer this, but currently the ordinance is only for 4 units and above. Mr. Palmer / Barr.
That may be a promotion for me. Mr. Bryson, so to answer your question directly, yes, we could limit it to zoning districts, but there's another way based on what's in the draft memo for you, or in the draft ordinance and in the memo, that would also have that same effect. So if the ordinance was limited to a common ownership, so a single owner, that would enable multifamily housing. But if the ordinance was allowed for a developer to build, say, 20 condos in one building and then sell those condos, so multiple owners, then you would need to look at the zoning district if you want to limit it. Does that make sense?
I also had a kind of similar secondary question, but I can wait till.
I have just a quick question and then I'll go back to you. Mr. Palmer, I think I get where Ms. Hale is coming from and I don't want to derail her, but I'm also getting a little impatient. So I'm moving forward. If we passed an ordinance, if we went forward with limiting lots, limiting common ownership as is recommended, could we come back in the future and look at expanding that, and would it be terribly difficult to do?
Give me a sense on your time frame. Is this pass this or clear this ordinance out of finance, get it to assembly, let the assembly make the ultimate decision, let it run for 6 months, a year-ish, and then evaluate? No problem with that. If the finance committee wants to clear it out today and then not refer it to the assembly for introduction for a month or 2 months, so the finance committee can look at it again in that time frame, no problem. So either way works.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bryce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought at one point we had, maybe I'm confused, where they didn't have to pay property tax on the undeveloped property until the property was developed. Is that still a thing?
Yes, Mr. Bryson, so thank you. We do have that currently in code. So this would be, what the finance committee is contemplating would be an additional benefit or opportunity, if you want, that there may be some overlap between the two, depending on what happens.
I'll follow up on that. So I'm going in, I want to overlap. So if we had a condo issue, like a guy builds a whole bunch of things that could be individually parceled out, are we set up now, or could we allow for the developer to be able to build, like, say, 100 condos with the developer having tax abatement so he could get the place built without the tax liability? But then the moment that the condo becomes a privately owned condo, then regular property tax applies. So that way we have the incentive to get the building, but we're not unfairly not taxing a citizen who owns their condo.
That's the concept.
Mr. Watt.
So through the chair, I think what happens in that scenario is the tax benefit is very short duration for the developer. And so the way we have it now, you would get tax abatement for, I think, 10 years is what we're talking about. 12 years. But if a developer builds and sells, there's this very short window of tax benefit that's probably not significant.
So we're talking about builders, developers versus landlords. So right now you have to be a developer and a landlord in order to benefit from this. And we're benefiting landlords. That's why I was asking about this development component. So if we can allow for developers, and that way developer can not be a landlord, could still take advantage, not being able to build without a tax liability is a pretty significant advantage. And right now, as I'm seeing it, if you were the developer, you'd have to be and maintain being the landlord unless they found an entity that could buy it as a whole person for the remaining of that time. And again, we have the rich guy in the transaction as the beneficiary of all this stuff here. So that's why I'm digging.
Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, so, on that concept, there's probably multiple ways to think of it, but traditional condos, so one plot of land with one building with multiple units inside, that would be different than what we've had recently in the community. Think of the condos across the street from Safeway, for example, where there's one master piece of land and condos own the sky and a little bit of a postage stamp of dirt underneath them. That's a different condo setup than the traditional method. So there is a way to draft this with the developer having the ability to have tax abatement initially, but then once the condo unit is sold, then that tax abatement would cease. So there is a way to do that. But it kind of depends on what the policy goal of the assembly is. If the policy goal of the assembly is to encourage development, the initial development, we could do that. If the policy goal is to encourage development of specific types of housing, like multifamily apartments, that's a different goal.
Thank you.
Ms. Hale and then Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I sympathize and agree with you that we want to move this quickly. And I think I've got the questions that I had answered. And I also think perhaps in some way, some response to Mr. Bryson, we have lots and lots of things we could do. And one of the things that I think this assembly is interested in being expedient and moving quickly rather than noodling this until we get it perfect, because we know it's not going to be perfect. So I really like what we have here. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the direction we're going. I have lots of other ideas, but they're not going to be housed here. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Hale. I'm right there with you. Let's do all the ideas and let's do them quick. I just wanted to, and I very much appreciated the line of questioning Mr. Bryson had, because I think those are good concerns. If you could just expand a little bit on based on the direction he was going and the relatively short period of time, a benefit that the developer would get. We do currently have in code, though, if it's undeveloped, they have some benefit from that tax wise, if they're not building on it.
Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, so we do have a subdivision exemption, but we don't have one for a single plot of land that's being built.
Okay, just another thing for us to look at, just putting that in our heads.
Add that to the to-do list. Mayor Wallen.
Thank you. I'll do this in two motions just to make it simpler, I think, for everybody. So I would move that we amend the drafted ordinance to require that multiple units be built on a single lot in order to receive tax abatement. And I ask for unanimous consent.
I see no objection. That motion.
And then I
passes.
also move that we amend the drafted ordinance to state that tax abatement only be available on development that remain in common ownership. And ask for unanimous consent.
I see no objection to that one. That one passes as well.
And can I bring up a little topic that isn't covered in this memo? And it's, sorry if I find the squirrel. Since we're doing tax abatement and we're talking about short-term rentals, I'm assuming that as part of this, that if you want the tax abatement, that you can't do short-term rentals with your units, because we're looking for housing, not rents.
Do we already have that?
I don't remember if it's already in there.
It rings a bell.
For downtown.
Yeah. Mr. Palmer.
Yes, so it might appease the finance committee that in the draft, there's a proposal I have that'll eventually get back to you whenever you say so. It does prohibit short-term rentals from benefiting from the tax abatement.
Okay, great.
Okay, just making sure.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. Well, this will come back to us. Moving on to agenda topic B, veteran organization sales tax exemption, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Chair Treem. This, it is always a mistake to say something is simple. But this is a relatively simple request. Veteran service organizations are considered by the Internal Revenue Service to be nonprofit organizations. However, they're classified as 501c19s rather than 501c3 C3s and C4s. Our code doesn't say nonprofit organizations. It says 501c3 and 501c4. As a result of that, under our code, veteran service organizations like the American Legion remain taxable, even though they are classified by the IRS as nonprofit organizations. There is a request from Mr. Mitchell representing the American Legion Post to correct that in the code. I endorse that idea. I think it is sensible to treat those two separately situated nonprofit organizations the same. The one thing that I would say at the outset is that even though we removed the other subject about nonprofits from the agenda tonight, I think these are on parallel tracks. I think they're both worth doing, or fixing what some may see as a kind of an error in the code or a failure to evolve in the code. Is separate from consideration of how we would modify the sales tax exemption overall. So even if you intend to modify, limit, reduce, repeal the sales tax exemption for nonprofits, it still, to me, makes sense that you would treat veteran service organizations in the same way that you treat other nonprofits. I think this is something that we endorse and recommend. I think the potential revenue impact on the city is de minimis. I couldn't put a number on it because there's too few of them, but it's just not significant.
Are there any other types of nonprofits in the IRS code that we should look at the same time?
That's a good question. There are, but I'm not aware of any nonprofits in Juneau that fall outside of the 501c3, 501c4, 501c19 that for which tax exemption is reasonable and or requested. So I'm not aware of any.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move ordinance 2022-36 to the full assembly. And ask for unanimous consent.
Do we have an ordinance already?
Yes, so the next page. Or 2 pages.
Page 12 of the packet.
Oh, okay. I thought I read this as, okay. I thought I read it differently. Anyway, thank you. Any objection to the mayor's motion? Seeing none, so moved. So we are skipping agenda topic C for this evening and on to agenda topic D, which is field house staffing. Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry to, this is sort of a small issue, I think. Sorry to drag it in front of you, but so when we received the field house back from the nonprofit in the winter, we let you know there were going to be additional costs. And then we brought those additional, and the assembly seemed amenable in the winter, and we brought those forward in the budget process, and they landed on the decision list or the pending list. And the assembly, had its sharp budget pencil out and crossed them out. And we weren't sure if that's really what you meant to do. And so we're bringing this back, and I kind of hate to bring something back that you worked on recently. The field house gets used a lot. It's very popular. And so we have a sort of fork in the road of either we're going to cut services or we're going to add in that increment. We could add it in and it could live within the park's budget and it would be under the manager's authority, but I don't think that would be in the spirit of the conversations that we already had. The general longstanding interplay between the manager and the assembly is to let the assembly know when there are new FTEs, because new FTEs are hard to remove in the future and they can be recurring. There is funding in the current fiscal year. Mr. Schaaf can hardly hire anybody right now. So in this fiscal year, adding this back in would result in hopefully being able to hire an employee and probably a slightly reduced lapse. And in the FY next year budget, we would add that increment back in. So looking for the assembly to consent to maintain the level of service that we're providing at the field house in the addition of that FTE.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Watt. I can't believe that you can't hire because every day I'm tempted to quit the assembly and go work for Parks and Rec. Mr. Bryson.
That was an option. So what have we, if any, like research have we done to like hour uses? 14 hours, 7 days a week? I'm not even open that long. I mean, that's a lot of hours. Sunday morning at 7 a.m. We have maybe we do have a huge need. So I think the question I would have is, what have we looked at to the hourly uses? What are the heavy times? Could it be closed, say, from like 1 to 4 o'clock when the high school students need to get over there? Or is it being used in the afternoon? Do we only have turf for tots some of the days, or do we have it 5 days a week? 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is a lot of labor hours.
Mr. Schaaf.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson, through the chair. So yes, it is a lot of hours. The field house has 20 core user groups, and that ranges from all of the athletic teams for the school district, Midnight Suns, Capital Soccer League, and they all want to use the facility at the same time. But obviously, much like Treadwell Arena, we can't accommodate them all at the same time. So we do have to program them in throughout the day. The school district does use it during the instructional day for some of those, some of their programs. We also have a lot of community programming that goes on. So the Turf for Tots is currently on a pretty limited schedule because we don't have the staff to run it. But we have been reassigning staff, senior managers, to make sure that the facility is open for Turf for Tots, so childcare providers are able to use the facility as well as just parents. We also have a lot of folks who use the track for walking during the middle of the day. That's mainly our senior citizens and retirees that come during the middle of the day. So we do have people in the building pretty much throughout the entire day. The only time of year where we see a reduction in the use during the day, and we do reduce the hours accordingly, is during the summertime. So during the summertime, that's why you're not probably getting a lot of phone calls, because we're only open 3 days a week currently. But beginning about the middle of this month, we are going to be programmed with rentals for all these user groups almost the entire day, 7 days a week. And that's where we're really struggling right now. We can't accommodate those rentals with the staffing we have right now.
Thank you. That is extremely helpful information. Just offhand, do you know what the cost recovery for the field house prior to the pandemic level, or what the level of cost recovery was prior to the pandemic?
You bet. Through the chair, it's a complicated answer because the expenditures for facilities maintenance were not necessarily what was required to maintain the building. So now that CBJ owns the building, we are maintaining it to the standard that we maintain our buildings and facilities to, which does cost more. So our facilities maintenance has increased. Our electrical consumption also has increased because we're running the HVAC system as it was designed to be run. Previously, 50% of the system was typically turned off to save power, but that caused other issues with moisture and that type of thing in the building. So our expenses are higher and our staffing costs are higher. Under the previous nonprofit ownership and management under contract with Eagle Crest, the facility more or less did break even. But at the same time, they were chipping away at their savings. So they did have a bit of money tucked away, but they were chipping away at that as repairs were required. So, I think going forward under CBJ management, one thing I say often is that nothing we do really makes money. This is really no exception. So I think a reasonable cost recovery for this facility is going to be similar, but probably higher than the pools, and something less than Treadwell Arena. So you're probably looking at 30 to 50% going forward. And that's going to be something we're going to learn about as we resume normal operations. We haven't had a normal year of operations yet. We've only owned it for 1 year, and that was a pandemic year.
Ms. Schaff, thank you very much for the information. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have Ms. Hale and then Mayor Weldon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I 100% support adding staff to the field house. As a user and as the spouse of a user, my experience is when I show up expecting it to be open and it's not open, then I stop showing up. When the hours are chopped, which they are right now, drastically, actually, people stop showing up. And so the very purpose of the field house ends up being served less and less when it cannot be staffed reliably. And I guess I would also say, when staff comes to me and tells me that they need additional staff and tells me how they've worked at managing the staffing load and not been able to, I trust your judgment. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to gently remind Mr. Bryson that the pool is probably open 12 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so is Treadwell Arena when it's open. So it's not unusual for a recreation center to be that, which is good because it means the public is out recreating. My question to Mr. Schaff and Mr. Bryson alluded to it is, so are we looking at a rate study or anything like that?
So through the chair, if I could, for clarification, a rate study for the fees and charges that we have.
Yes, absolutely. I know that when we first took it over, you guys were thinking that some of them were interesting.
Indeed, and through the chair. So we have, as a commitment to the user groups during the transitional period, we've kept the fee structure the same as it was under Eagle Crest, because we recognize that a lot of these groups are nonprofits. A lot of them actually rely on youth activity grants to pay for things like the field house rentals. So we haven't made any changes. Beginning with this year, we are starting to phase in some changes. So one of those changes is we're going to be starting to charge for storage. And that's also going to, I think, help us with some of our management of storage space in the facility. And then going forward, yes, we will be looking at those fees and charges. Probably not through a formal study, really, because it's kind of difficult because this is a very unique facility. I'm not aware of similar facilities outside Whitehorse, really. But our goal is to recover what costs we can while still maintaining access to the facility for the community.
Okay. Any further questions on this topic? No. Do you want to make a motion, Mayor Weldon?
Only for you, Madam Chair. I would move that we consent to the addition of a full-time employee for the Diamond Park Field House, the gift that keeps on giving.
Okay, okay. We can all want it back, but it is great and we love what you do.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. Thank you, Mr. Schaaf. We're zooming through this agenda.
I'm assuming that was, nobody objected.
No, I don't think that was objection. That didn't count as objection. Next item on our agenda is our restricted budget reserve update, which I think is a fascinating topic. Other people might not, but Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Chair Treem. This is on page 18 of your packet, which is not labeled 18, but it is between pages 17 and 19. This is, there's no narrative or memo with this. It's just, I've had this table for a little bit. I've been meaning to find a time to bring it to the committee. There have been questions over the last couple of years just about kind of where we are with the restricted budget reserve and whether it is, it meets its original intent. And I have known for some time that the answer to that question was no, it does not. But at the same time, for the latter part of the last 2.5 years, we've been in a pandemic and we've considered tapping the restricted budget reserve. So there hasn't really been an opportune time to talk about potentially adding funds to the restricted budget reserve to bring it up to the level. So just to go back a little bit of history, the resolution, the top two sentences is directly from the resolution. It was passed in 2012. It's resolution 2629. You can find that on the city website and read the whole thing if you'd like. But it puts into policy from the assembly the concept of using the GFOA recommendation of a restricted budget reserve of not less than 2 months of annual operating revenue. So that's what we've tried to do. And you can see there the audited operating revenue from FY 2016 to 21, and then the projected revenues for 22 and 23. Obviously, 21, that audit revenue is pretty low. It kind of restabilizes a little in 22, and it gets back to what we think is probably a kind of a normal place in 23. And just to, it's just 2 months of that. It's divided by 12 times 2 gets you to a balance of the restricted budget reserve that's required by resolution 2629, and the difference between that and what we see in that account today. So one thing you'll notice in the second, the third column from the right, the loan appropriation. So remember, at the beginning of the pandemic, we loaned JEDC $3 million to issue loans, emergency loans to small businesses. We've gotten a lot of that back. We've gotten to date $2.6 million back from JEDC and 400,000 remaining. You should have gotten a report, I think, from me last week or the week before from Mr. Holst about how they're doing with that program. They've actually done really well with businesses repaying. It looks like we will have somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 and $150,000 of delinquent loans by the end of the program that the city will undertake collection actions on. Some of that eventually will not be repaid, but I do think the majority of it will. So the resulting debt to the restricted budget reserve, maybe that's not the right words, but the amount of contribution that would be required to get it in compliance with resolution 2629 is something in the range of $5 to $5.5 million. There is an amount in the 1% sales tax, which I said I was going to look up and didn't, but I can look it up in a second. That would bring that up, but it's far less than that amount. So
I think Mr. Watt knows the amount.
2 million in the 1%. Thank you. But in any event, that amount is considerably less than the debt that resolution 2629 would indicate. So I think as you think about disposition of fund balance, this is one of the things you could do. It always makes sense for a municipality to set money aside when things are good. So if the economy is rebounding and fund balance, unrestricted general fund balance is strong, it might be the right time to rebuild the restricted budget reserve or to continue building the restricted budget reserve. That number doesn't go down over time because our revenues will continue to go up. So, 16.7 of those revenues will continue to be a bigger and bigger number. And probably, if we ever got to a point where we had a fully funded budget reserve, I think it might just become a normal part of our budget process for the manager to propose moving an incremental amount of money every year as part of the manager's budget. That would be a sensible thing. That's a little difficult to do in an environment where it's $5 million. So I think, I don't know that there's any decision that anybody needs to make on this tonight. I think it's something you can consider as we head into the fall and talk about the FY23 budget, or the FY24 budget rather. And if you want to disposition fund balance into the restricted budget reserve, the map or the math to do that is in front of you. I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, Ms. Hale, then Ms. Wall, then Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rogers. This is really good and really interesting because I know Mr. Bryson always asks about this and they're good questions. I do want to point out that a resolution cannot require the assembly to do anything, so we're not required to do what is being discussed here, even though you did use that word, Mr. Rogers. I do have a question. There are these balances, but is there no interest earned? Like, do we not invest the restricted budget reserve so that there would be interest earned?
Yeah, Assemblymember Hale, we do. And so it's an interesting question. I would have to look, but I think the answer to this question, and it's an interesting answer given where we're at, is that probably what happens on an accounting basis, and we could change this if you wanted us to, the interest earned by the restricted budget reserve probably comes back into unrestricted, because we won't take unrestricted money and restrict it on behalf of the assembly. So you would need by some action to transfer money from unrestricted into restricted. Similarly, given the situation where we have had negative earnings, real losses in the midterm investment portfolio last year, there is not a recorded loss for that here. That portion of the loss for the restricted budget reserve has been absorbed in the unrestricted portion of fund balance.
That's great. Thank you.
Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I miss the JDC loan that we made. Is that balance? Is that asset? Where does it sit here currently? Is it in our balance that it exists and it's going to be paid back, or it's?
So Assemblymember Wall, what you see in that
Sorry.
column is a negative 3
Appropriation.
million, and then a positive 1.2, a positive 1.2, positive 2. The difference is 400,000. So what this reflects is that 400,000 should come back into the restricted budget reserve if it was all fully repaid. So if you took that theory, you would not owe or be recommended to contribute 5 million, but something just less than that, right? So I think 5 million is probably a good working number just for everybody's sense.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Rogers, why is it based on revenue and not expenditure?
That's
Yeah.
my favorite question.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good question. It's one, that's the GFOA best practice. So we didn't make that up. We ripped it right from my industry association. My predecessor, Mr. Bartholomew, also had varying feelings on this subject and really thought that if you use this standard, you would wind up with a restricted budget reserve that may be larger than you really needed. That was Mr. Bartholomew's opinion. I think the truth is that the thing that I said to Chair Freeman a number of days ago is that over a long period of time, taking out annual variances for any municipality, expenditure and revenue over a long period of time will be the same. They're not fundamentally going to be different. They're going to be the same. You could make the argument that we have, one thing is most municipalities have very durable revenue streams, especially if you have property tax, right? So you don't actually, most municipalities don't see really considerable changes, especially in an acute way to revenue. We're a little different than that because we depend on about half of our general fund revenue from sales tax, which is just more economically sensitive. But some would make the argument that revenues are more consistent than expenditures. The other thing that's a little bit true is that you might have more control over expenditures than you do revenues, right? In a downturn or in an upswing, revenues are going to do what they're going to do. You could increase tax rates, but you would have limited control over revenues, whereas you do have more control over expenditures. I think it's probably a little bit of an academic debate. I think the most important thing is that over a long period of time, any municipality's revenues are going to equal its expenditures. That's just the way the math is going to work out.
There's like a one pager on the GFOA website if you wanted to read about why you would choose revenues versus expenditures. I think it's pretty interesting. Mayor Walden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This might be getting in the weeds a little bit, but on the audited revenues versus the projected revenues, how close do they usually turn out to be? I mean, are they pretty close, or do we have a little sway there?
No, thank you, Mayor Weldon. We do have a lot of sway, in part because we get large federal grants we don't expect. I mean, so if you just take the course of the pandemic, I projected our revenues would be much lower than we were because we got 50-some million dollars worth of federal grants that wound up in the general fund. Now, obviously, we spent those, but they're still revenue. So it can be large swings in our revenues as various things happen. In a normal environment, we are pretty good at projecting overall revenues. It's a little hard for us to accurately project tax revenues. You know, there's always some push and pull there. But we usually wind up within 5 to 10%, but on a number this big, that's a significant margin of error.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since it was before my time, what was the mechanism for the contributions in FY16 through 19?
Mr. Smith, I believe that those were just done by supplemental appropriation. There was, I think, my understanding, and I could go back and figure this if the committee was interested in it. I think there was a plan. I think after the resolution was passed in 2012, there was a plan for filling the restricted budget reserve, and to the degree that the assemblies could over that time, contributions were made over a period of time that got it up to that 16.3 ish balance, which was the target at the time. But by the time that we got to that target, we were already several $1 million behind because our amount of annual revenue had gone up. So there was a period of time where the assemblies were building the restricted budget reserve. I mean, remember that as of 2012, it didn't really exist. So it was a process to build it over time. And I do believe I correctly recall, there was a plan to do that.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just to, I mean, I guess just wondering, and I imagine some of us, others are too, but just if there are some mechanisms or something that we should consider that would contribute, I don't know if nothing really is automatic, but anyway, just some type of built-in mechanism so that we keep up a little closer. Anyway, and I can talk with you offline about it.
Yeah, Assemblymember Smith, I think that in a normal environment, if we were at that balance, it would be absolutely sensible for the manager in the manager's budget to be proposing a transfer from unrestricted to restricted as part of the budget process. We've just never been in a position where that was really plausible because the debt, quote unquote, to the restricted budget reserve has just been too big. It's been too unmanageable. But I think if we ever got restricted budget reserve up to that 2 months revenue, we could certainly make it a normal routine annual process to transfer over a little bit more money.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Rogers, if you could remind me, do we earn on average about 2% on our investments? Was it somewhere around 2% or was it a little bit less than that? Like over a long period of time, we average about 2%. That was what my memory was.
Assemblymember Bryson, 2% is a good target. Just like we don't do this. We don't have this talk very often. So like a tiny bit of Treasury 101 on any given day, CBJ has $225 million to $250 million of cash and cash equivalent assets. About 160 million of that is in the midterm portfolio. That's the money that we give to a third-party investment manager that is invested in what we call the midterm portfolio, which has a Gov credit 2 to 5 year index that we base our returns on. that 2 to 5 gov credit index will earn about what you said, between 2 and 2.25%, which is designed to just keep us even with inflation, right? And the long-term target for the Fed for inflation is 2 to 2.25%. So that's about what those funds will earn there. It'll just keep pace with inflation. But the other thing that we don't talk about very often is that on any given day, that $220 to $250 million, there's also money sitting at AMLIP, the Alaska Municipal League Investment Pool, and we also have money in several different banks that we use for daily transactions. The money sitting in those banks tends to earn almost nothing. The money at AMLIP actually earns a pretty good return for its liquidity and low risk. And the money that is with, and by pretty good return, it's sometimes in excess of 1%. It can sometimes get close to 2%. Sometimes when the AMLIP is really doing well, it will earn almost as much as the long-term portfolio or the midterm portfolio. But the money that's sitting in a bank, and we on any given day have $20 to $30 million sitting in what we usually call our day bank. That's just where we make deposits, and a depository bank. That money is earning almost nothing. So, and everything I just said is separate from how much of that money is the hospitals, how much of that money is the general funds, how much of that money is in any given fund. That's a separate concept. But in terms of the cash and cash equivalents investments, 160 million is invested in bonds via the midterm portfolio, third-party manager, another 30 to 40 million dollars in the AMLIP, and anywhere between 10 and 30 million in a couple of banks that we use as depository banks, transactional banks. Yeah, apologize for the long thing on that. It just we don't talk about that very often. So
follow up. Okay, so now that we've determined that most of our long-term money earns roughly 2%, I can use that as a safe number. This 19 or $20 million, if you look at what it was before we took the 3 million out and what it should be now, right around 20 million, that's roughly $400,000 a year. So if we just set up, and we don't have to attach this to the restricted budget reserve, because if we have a loss, it would harm our restricted budget reserve. But if we duplicated what we did in 19 and just put 400,000, that would be the 2% inflation proofing. And that's the money that it earns essentially anyways, even though it's not directly connected to it. So Madam Finance Chair, maybe their next budget cycle, just put up a $400,000 2% line that we can constantly inflation proof this. And then whatever way you guys want to bring it up to the other 5 million we're missing, I'm getting. Okay. Thank you very much for the very great explanation of where our funding investments are right now, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Any more questions on this? We don't need to do anything on it. Just remember it for April, which is impossible, but we'll remind ourselves.
Wait, again.
So remember it for April, but there's no way that no way I'm gonna remember it by April.
I'm gonna bring up the budget at the retreat.
Okay, so we will move on then to our final agenda item F, which is Gastineau Lodge's Affordable Housing Fund loan proposal. Is this Mr. Watt? Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Chair. You've got a memo from myself and some appraisal information. So going back nearly a year, we had the 2021 Affordable Housing Fund solicitation. We had a bunch of proposals. We had a scoring team that included staff, a banker, and a developer, number of projects. There were issues with all of the allotments. The Gastineau Lodges development project was kind of hanging out there because the group recommended a pre-development loan if that loan was collateralized. The development team proposed using the land. The land per the assessor is at 134,000, so a lot less than the 700,000 requested loan. After some time, they provided an appraisal and a secondary, more detailed appraisal that's at 795,000. So in these times of criticism of the assessor assessing commercial property too high, it's a little bit amusing to have an appraiser come back and say, oh, actually, you're 6 times too low. And maybe it helps explain the plight of the assessor a little bit, that it is hard to assess 8,000 properties or whatever the office has to do. Nonetheless, the question really is, do we want to do a pre-development loan and how comfortable are we on values? So I spent quite a bit of time looking at the property and the appraisal. I think the appraisal is rather bullish. I think that if that property was listed at 795, it probably would sit on the market for a long time. I'm also reasonably persuaded that our 134,000 could be quite low. So recognizing that in any loan situation, there's going to be some risk, and you were trying to stimulate projects. I think a little bit of the discussion tonight is the Assembly's appetite for risk. If development projects were easy, banks would loan more easily. And I think on this one, pre-development loans are something banks aren't really interested in. So hence it came to us. I am comfortable bridging the distance between the assessor's value and the appraiser's value. So working with Mr. Sangston, we had quite a few good discussions. We came up with some loan parameters that are on packet page 20 or page 2 of the memo. Let's just talk about that. So the first bullet A, up to 350,000 collateralized by the property. So essentially, what that says is assume the property is actually worth 350 rather than 134 or less than half of what the appraiser suggested. And that 350 be used for advancing the project, including ordering materials for retaining wall, and we would put a lien on the building materials, so thereby reducing that risk a little bit. So I think the way I look at it is we're not a high risk operation, but we are trying to encourage housing development. So if we assume a higher value, which I think is doesn't seem super risky. And if we cap that at 350 and we put a lien on building materials, I think we limit the risk of that activity. And then we wait until the developer does grading, drainage, and gets conditional use permitting, which I think all add value to the property. So we'll have a lien on a property that they're spending money from this loan, adding value to the property. I think the conditional use permitting and the grading and drainage could be quite expensive. And then we would, the second recommendation in paragraph C, a second 350,000, improving the property, provided that the developer matches it 1-to-1. So again, moderating our risk. And if our 350 is going into the property and a developer's 350 is going into the property, I think reasonably we're mitigating our exposure. There's a little bit of dialogue there about what happens if the project fails and what the developer has for hurdles trying to do financing. They're looking at a HUD loan program. And the HUD loan program, I think, would require any affordability requirements they would require affordability requirements, I think, that would satisfy us. So I think on this, my recommendation is if you understand the risk and you're comfortable with the risk, then I would look for a motion for an appropriation ordinance for the full assembly for a $700,000 loan in accordance with those bullet points. I won't represent it as no risk, but I think to me, acceptable risk. And we've tried to work to make that risk minimized.
Thank you, Mr. Watt. I've got a lot of hands, so we'll start with Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I find it a tad ironic that the same assessor who faulted the city for increasing the value of our commercial land and vacant lots by 50% now assesses or appraises a lot downtown for 6 times that amount. But with that being said, I appreciate the developer coming forward. It's the first project we've seen and there's 72 units, so that's pretty exciting and would like to help you out. But my question would be, I understand the developer is not the owner of the land. How would that work?
Through the chair, so the developer and the owner of the land have a agreement. I think it's kind of a joint venture agreement. And we would fully be able to lien the land.
Next I have Mr. Bryson, then Ms. Candies and Ms. Wall.
All right, I got a few questions going along this line. As you're talking about putting a lien on the property and the materials. So if the developer doesn't have enough money now, how would we be ensured that the developer would have enough money to complete the project? There's a reason why banks require 50% cash investment in a brand new development, because there's so many variables going into a big development like this. That would be the first thing that worries me is, I mean, I don't mind loaning this money. I want to do this project, but if they don't have enough money for a $20 million project to get started, or has there been material presented that shows that they have substantial funds, that this is going to just to lower their cost of development? Could they maybe, could we hear a little bit about how their finances are going to apply to the project if we're going to fork over that much money? And then if we put a lien on everything, what does that do for their ability to receive whatever other financing they are? And is the city willing to take a second position behind a bank? Because if the city is trying to take a first position, there's no way a bank's going to loan. So it's one thing to say that we could put a lien on it, but if we put a lien on it, the guy's thinking that, hey, I can borrow this money unencumbered, but then we put a lien on it and then we eliminate their ability to do any future financing. So have we had a discussion about the potential of liens, and have they shown that they have $10 million that they're going to be able to invest in it, and they're not hoping that our 700,000 is going to start the windfall of getting them developed? Thank you for those complicated questions.
But good questions, Mr. Bryson. Thank you. Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, good question. So we can certainly bring Mr. Sankson up, but as we've discussed this, the funding vehicle that they're looking at is a HUD loan, and HUD would require that our loan be paid off. But the HUD loan funds would not become available essentially until they are ready to pour concrete. So they've got to they've got to own the land, do their site work, do their permitting, and not have encumbrances on it to get that HUD loan. So if things went well, our loan would be paid off relatively quickly.
I think that was one of the answers. Did we see with their financial stake in this, like we saw that they had substantial funds that weren't, even though they're anticipating on a HUD loan, that they had some funding applied to this?
So Mr. Sankson applied for the Affordable Housing Fund, which I think requires a lot of that information. So we probably could look at his application materials, which I imagine.
So I'll be getting thin on my knowledge here, and also my theory on this. So when Mr. Sankson applied for the Affordable Housing Fund loan, he showed his pro forma, what he thought it would take to develop the project. Construction costs have accelerated substantially since that time. And as I note in the memo, he currently thinks that there's a funding gap of 1.3 million, or at least 1.3 million. As I looked at this, I really looked at this pre-development loan as a standalone question. And just kind of bifurcating the future development. So if we loan the money, and he uses that to improve the property by grading, drainage, utilities, permitting, retaining wall, and never does anything else, and doesn't pay back the loan, we get an improved piece of property which seemed like an okay outcome to me, and then we would try and find somebody else to develop it. Everything that happens after that, we're not exposed to or involved in. As I note in the second to last paragraph on page 20, they still have a funding gap. And they may make future proposals to governmental agencies, including us. And we may or may not look favorably on those proposals. So in looking at this, I chose to look at it just as that pre-development loan, and whether that loan could stand on its own.
Any follow-ups, Mr. Bryson?
I think.
Thank you. Ms. Euskadis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I appreciate this memo very much, and I appreciate the work to thread the needle. I think perhaps Mr. Manager's last comments about fully looking at them separately is something that I can feel comfortable with. My question was going to be about the HUD loan program. If it came from a different funding source or something for CBJ to throw some hook in for affordability, but if, I guess either way, it results in improved land and we have our money back, or we have this land. So thinking of bifurcating helps. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Euskadis. Next is Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, also wanted to just thank the manager for getting creative about how we might be able to make this work. And I feel like making a case for why we may want to take on more risk in this current environment. My question is about kind of the time and responsibilities, for staff to kind of monitor these additional parameters. Not that this one project might be a whole bunch of work, but if we start having kind of weird deals all over town, is that going to be a burden moving forward?
Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Chair. Probably, yes. Well, I mean, to be frank, we're kind of in new territory, right? We don't normally act as a bank. Our most comfortable activities as a municipality are fundraising, taxation, and fund disbursement, appropriations for municipal activity, and grants, one-time grants. As Mr. Rogers noted earlier, we did the loan program during the pandemic to get creative to try and solve that need. And I think we're trying to find a way to just push some housing projects forward. If you do an appropriation, that will be one hurdle, but Mr. Palmer and I will then actually try to write up a contract that makes sense and that doesn't put a burden on us. So we'll try to minimize that staff effort.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could have a slight follow-up to Ms. Wall's
Please, I was
question,
gonna say,
and then
that will lead right into.
and then I've got another one. What's the status of the housing officer position?
Chair Train, we have a housing officer, so a CDD employee who was formerly a planner, has taken a promotion, and we're onboarding that employee.
Super, because that will help. Thank you. So I think that I very much appreciate Mr. Sankson being here and working with Mr. Watt, Mr. Manager. I really appreciate the memo. I think that one of the things that you say in your recommendation, you say if the assembly feels comfortable understanding the risk of this loan, I think we should rephrase that to say if the assembly feels comfortable being slightly uncomfortable, because I think we need to get slightly uncomfortable and we need to step out there and take some risks. So I will push a book that I've been reading. It's by an author named, or I haven't been reading it yet, just listening to the podcast, but author named Jenny Schuetz, and she has written a book called Fixer Upper: How to Repair America's Broken Housing Systems. And that's one of the things she says we need to do, is we need to be willing to take risks. And that's why I was kind of probing on the earlier item. She also says, what's the cost or what's the risk of saying no? What's the risk of saying no to this project, for example? Not enough housing, strangling of our economy, the problems that we know exist where we have workers coming to town that don't have places to stay. So go for it. Thank you so much for this proposal.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. We'll make that required reading for the next meeting. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just curious about the risk, and that's what is the, if you're able to say, what is the likelihood that we know this project won't go forward in after dispersing the first 350,000 or dispersing the second amount? I mean, or is it equally balanced, or just no one really know? Anyway, just curious if we have insights on that.
What does your crystal ball say, Mr. Watt?
Thank you, Chair. My crystal ball says that there's more risk in the first 350,000. And so you'll be looking at that 350,000 plus any lien on building materials against that land. So if you're super pessimistic and the building materials are worth 0 and the land is worth what the assessor thinks, then your risk is about 216,000. That would be your risk. Because you would loan out the 350,000 and get the land back. If the developer gets a conditional use permit and gets all the permits for grading and drainage and starts to invest money in, I think the risk starts to go down a lot. So once that private money is going in, there's the incentive to complete the project really starts to grow, or the incentive to take the off ramp before the private money gets spent is very high if it doesn't look like a winner.
Follow up.
And actually, Chair Treem, if I could, Ms. Gladishevsky is not here, but I'm going to channel her if I can remember. So she was around when we adopted the Housing Action Plan. And the Housing Action Plan was written by a consultant. It was CZV Consulting. It was a guy, it was like Charles Bukowski, I think was his name. And he was super abrasive and blunt. And he gave the assembly one of the most blunt, direct, get real presentations that I've ever seen, and essentially said, if you want to bring units on in your community, you're going to have to figure out how to do incentives on the order of a large number of $50,000, $70,000 a unit. And Ms. Gladishevsky, Deputy Mayor, remembers that, and she brings that up periodically. So I guess I look at this. This is modest compared to that blunt advice that he once gave us.
Thank you, Mr. Watt. Follow up, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, thank you.
Microphone.
Thanks. Maybe a dumb question, but before we, I mean, I'm just seeing the conditional use permitting. I mean, I guess there's a pre-app meeting for anything like this, so it's not like we're going to give them $350,000 and they walk in and go, oh, and then CED says, oh no, this isn't going to work at all. I mean, that would be, we will address that before we, anyway, we'll have some semblance that the project is like, we'll have no sense. Okay. Just checking.
In cash and a plane ticket.
Mr. Watt. Are those sarcastic answers good enough for you, Mr. Smith, or do you want a real answer?
Meetings now? Oh, good.
Through the chair, we're not doing away with pre-app meetings. I think they're generally helpful.
Okay.
Or quite helpful.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see this as two competing risks, actually. The risk of $700,000, which we are all very uncomfortable with, but we also see the risk of losing 72 units. So, and it's a bargain price of what, 10 grand per unit?
Yeah.
If I did my math right, Mr. Rogers. So I would move that staff draft an appropriation ordinance, which includes the criteria above in ABC for a pre-development loan of up to $700,000. The funding source is the Affordable Housing Fund, and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? I see no objection. That motion passes. Thank you. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of today's meeting, but we have to wish Mr. Rogers good luck on the Ironman this weekend. So run, swim, and bike fast, and we'll be back next month.
Well done. 7-11. Yeah.